Today we're venturing deep into the heart of 10 true most disturbing Alaskan horror stories, where the land is as vast as its legends and just as terrifying. From eerie lights haunting dark rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed, get ready for Alaskan of the most disturbing true horror stories that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. They told me to keep my voice low, because names travel in the cold. In the far north, sound carries farther than light. A whisper can cross a frozen river and come back older. This film, 10 Most Disturbing True Alaskan Horror Stories, is my record of what I found. A cabin with a door that never lines up, a radio that answers before you speak, and a set of prints that circle a camp twice and then continue without a body. Out here, the night is not empty. It waits like a hunter who knows your breath. I learned not to trust the sky. The aurora can look like help from miles away, but it moves against the wind like a lantern under ice. On my third night, the recorder caught a voice saying my name from the middle of the river, and then the ice answered with a hollow knock. Once for yes. If you listen closely, you'll hear it too. Keep your lights low. Keep your coat zipped, and if the water speaks back, do not speak first. Story 1. Brown Mountain's Borrowed Lanterns. I drove up after sundown because the mountain does not like to be watched in daylight. Brown Mountain sits low and patient across from Linville Gorge, a dark back rising from Older Dark. The locals call it a bald in places, but at night it feels anything but bare. It feels dressed in something you can't see, history maybe, or attention. I parked at Wiseman's View where the gravel ends and the world opens like a breath held too long. The gorge dropped away in a shape my head understood more than my eyes. That is where the river chews its way through stone. That is where the sound of water becomes a kind of cluck. I did not speak at first. The old men at the store told me not to. Let the ridge talk first, one of them said, tapping the counter with 2 fingernails. Folks get better answers that way. So I let the ridge speak. It said nothing for a long time. The crickets tuned themselves. The pines rubbed their long fingers together. A moth touched my cheek and left the dust smell of paper on my skin. The sky felt close, like a roof dropped on a house to keep weather out and secrets in. I set my recorder on the stone wall and pressed a fresh tape in. I still use cassettes for this work. Digital catches everything, but tape keeps the shape of the night. You can feel the weight of what spoke by how it drags the reels. My father taught me that the summer before he went to work underground. He came home with dust on his knuckles and jokes that didn't always have the energy to find their punchlines. He told me Brown Mountain did not take men the way a mine does. It borrowed them. Sometimes it returned what it owed. Sometimes it kept the change. When the first light rose, it was small and white, as if someone had touched a match to the line of the ridge and not blown it out yet. It did not flicker. It held itself still until I was the one who felt I might tremble. The old stories say the Catawba watched for these lights like you watch for a neighbor's lantern through fog after a long day. Men from the timber camp saw them too, said they were foreman's lamps or lost mules stepping careful with fire in their teeth. I had read all that. Reading is not the same as being counted by a glow. August 9th, I whispered to mark the tape. 10:19 p.m., this is me. I said my name because the mountain keeps its own ledger and I did not want it to fill the line for me. The light drifted left, not fast, and slowed over a crease in the ridge as if feeling for a place to stand in the air. Another rose behind it, amber this time, warming like whiskey in a palm. They kept a polite distance from each other but moved together in the way of men carrying a heavy thing, each ready to take more of the weight if the other stumbled. Do you know my family? I asked. My uncle came up here in '79. He was carrying a carbide lamp and a debt he didn't talk about. He never brought either home. The white light answered first. It stopped its drift and faced me, an odd word for something with no front, but that's the only word that fits. The sound changed. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was packed tight the way a loaf is heavy with grain. I smelled wet iron and green wood scorched by a lightning strike that happened years ago, but only just finished burning in the nose. My watch ticked 2 seconds fast, then the second hand hung on the 3 and waited. Ray, I said. Saying a dead man's name is like throwing a rope into a well. You learn what the well is by what the rope catches. The amber light tilted, a small nod, and slipped downslope in a line that made sense to the body more than the eye. Paths hold memory. Even when brush grows over a road, your feet will find the old grade if you quiet your hurry. The white light stayed with me. It moved across the stone of the overlook until it was an arm's length from my recorder. I made a rule a long time ago about not reaching first. I kept it. The light did the reaching. It leaned into the recorder's little foam windscreen and the tape jumped. The needle went to red, but the sound was not loud. It was heavy. I heard my father clear his throat in the way that meant he was about to tell me something he'd put off telling for years. Then the throat became the wind, and the wind shaped my name with a softness I recognized from my mother when she called me back across a creek. The light did not enter the recorder. It pressed itself against it like a man pressing his hand on a door he cannot open from his side. My fingers itched to help. I did a foolish thing then, or maybe an obedient thing. It depends on which elder you ask. I extended my palm. The light settled there. It was not heat. It was like holding a jar just pulled from a stream where someone kept milk cold. The weight of it surprised me. What you would call light wasn't light at all. It was work. It leaned into the hand the way a tool leans, sure that the body will remember how to use it. It showed me things with pressure rather than pictures. Gravel under boot heels, a mule's harness squeal in damp leather. Laughter held short to keep from spooking whatever was just beyond the bend. The soft panic when you realize a road you've walked your whole life has decided to be longer tonight. The strange relief when you understand that someone else is walking that longer road with you, breathing in time so you don't have to do all the counting yourself. Where did you go? I asked the white light. It did not point. It moved. I followed. I did not look away from the path wider than my hand. That is an old trick the mountain plays. If you stare at the wide dark, it will widen. Keep the road in your eyes and the dark will mind its manners. The amber light led down along an old timber trace. My boots remembered where to fall before my knees did. Toads scraped the dust and made a small sound like wet fingers on paper. I thought about my uncle's carbide lamp and the way he tapped it on his palm when the flame shortened. Like a man tapping a pocket for the shape of a missing coin. The trace curved and narrowed and became a seam through laurel, and the light slipped one by one. They waited for me on the far side. I did not ask how. The air changed. It had the taste of a basement where canning jars have been kept so long. The glass took on the memory of peaches. A whip-poor-will called once, then stopped mid-name. I stopped too. The white light held still above the old road. The amber light lowered to a stump and settled until the stump shadow looked like a man sitting bent forward, elbows on knees. "Ray," I said again. It's strange, speaking to a lamp. It's stranger feeling like the lamp is the least strange thing in the night. The white light lifted a little and pulsed. Someone nodding yes so slowly a city person would miss it. My watch moved on. Then it moved back. A long, quiet minute shaved itself and slid under the hour like a snake under a barn door. I felt the absent weight of it in my teeth. That is the other thing the mountain does. It borrows time you were not using yet. A sound came from the old road ahead. Not walking. Rolling. As if a wagon was coming down with its load covered so the driver wouldn't be ashamed of what he carted after dark. I stepped aside. The lights moved farther to the verge. The rolling sound passed me in a place with no wheels. The white light dimmed the way men take off their hats for funerals. Then, my name. Not in my father's voice. In my own, but older. It came from a little distance up the empty road. It had the tired in it that I hear in myself now when I agree to the thing I swore I wouldn't do again. "I'm here," I said. Careful. I did not say yes. My father always told me that yes belongs to the living and should not be rented out. The amber light rose. It hovered at my shoulder like a partner learning which way I dance. We went on. The old trace opened into a small flat under scrub pines where a railroad used to cross. The ties are long gone, but the ground remembers the weight of machines. I felt the thrum of engines that were not there. My recorder captured it, the shape of a horn without its sound. It is a strange thing to write, but you will hear it if you listen right. The place where a whistle should be. A figure stood at the far edge of the flat. I did not see a body. I saw a place my attention could not go around. If you've ever tried to pass a slow truck on a mountain curve when the road keeps reminding you of how small you are, you know the feeling. The lights held back. This was not their work. The figure, the place, waited while the ground under my boots tried to decide how much of me it wanted to hold. "You were late," it said. The voice came from the gap between two stones. The wind did not carry it. The voice carried the wind. "I didn't know I was expected," I said. I think I smiled. It was a bad habit from childhood. Show your teeth when you're scared to convince someone else you are friendly. The figure did not like it. The lights leaned away from me as if my mouth had become a bright thing that should not be pointed at anyone. You followed uphill, the voice said. That is not the direction for returning. I'm not returning, I said. I'm looking, the ground answered. It gave under my left foot where it had been firm under my right. I checked my balance. The white light moved closer in a quick, decisive swing and steadied at my shoulder like a hand that has caught more than one man who didn't deserve to be saved. You can be grateful and ashamed in the same breath. I was. What do you want? I asked the figure. Because that is the question that keeps you alive in places like this. If a thing has a want, it will often say it. Some wants you can meet, others you cannot. Knowing which is the whole skill of walking home. I want the sum that was never paid, the voice said. I want what the ledger says belongs to me. My uncle's debt? Your family's, the voice said without heat. He carried the lamp. Your father carried the breath. You carried the tape. And you? I asked, braver than I felt. I carry the seventh step when men put the box down, it said. Behind me, the air made a space where a footfall would fit. It did not fall. It waited to become a step if I asked for help. That is worse than a ghost in some ways. The offer of wait when you are tired enough to take it. What if I don't ask? I said. Then you will be followed, the voice said as if quoting a law. Not by me, by yourself where you should have been. The lights trembled in my peripheral like cattle deciding about a creek crossing. I felt the ridge behind me lean in. The moths, the pines, the river sounding far below like someone sorting coins. I did not feel alone, and that is not always the mercy it sounds like. Show me the road, I said. I didn't mean to. The words arrived with their boots on, tracked across the room of my mouth and did not wipe their feet. The figure moved the way a pressure moves when the weather changes. The white light stepped out over the edge of the flat and hung there, not falling, waiting for me to forget that I am a creature who needs ground. The amber light drifted toward the timber trace as if it had chosen to go home by a path that did not yet exist. My watch hand spun once in a full circle and stopped dead at 12. Midnight, though I could still see the color of the pines. I lifted my foot. The road rose to meet it. Behind me, the hidden footfall took its breath to step, one, careful, as if not to wake a sleeping child on its way past. The ground ahead opened in a seam no wider than a doorframe, and warm air came from it like a sigh out of a house that has been closed too long. The white light leaned into the seam the way a shoulder leans into a man's tired back. The voice in the stone said my full name the way the mountain says a river's when the river gets ideas about leaving. I did not say yes. I did not say no. I stepped into the seam and heard the recorder behind me click. And in the click I heard my father clear his throat. And in his throat I heard my uncle laugh. And under the laugh I heard my own voice from further on saying, we should not have come. Then the seam shut like a mouth that has decided to keep a secret. Story 2. The Clinchfield Loop without a whistle. I reached the Clinchfield Loops by late morning, the kind of bright day that looks honest until you notice how sound behaves. Apple trees stood in tidy rows above Alta Pass, their leaves moving slow like old people in church. Beyond them, the railroad carved its figure 8 into the mountain, folding over itself to climb without breaking. Men 100 years ago cut that path with steel and sweat. The track still remembers their hands. It sings when you get close. I parked at the edge of the orchard and walked the fence with my tripod on my shoulder. Bees worked the blossoms without hurry. I could smell cider even though there was none. Downslope. A cut opened through rhododendron, the rail shining in the dark like a line drawn by a ruler. I set the camera where the curve passes the old milepost and laid my cassette recorder on the ballast. Gravel shifted under my knees as I crouched. I pressed record and the tape took the day's quiet the way a lung takes air. August 10th, I said to mark the reel. 11:12 a.m., Clinchfield Alta Pass loops. I said my name plain. These places like names. They file them away. In rail country, you learn the horn. Long, long, short, long at every crossing. It is a law and a promise. The valley grows up around that pattern the way a child grows around a bedtime song. Today, from down the grade came the first hint of a train. The metal humming in the rail before the air nose. A high thread, then lower, then thick as a rope. I put 2 fingers on the track. Not hot, cold, but alive. My fingertips wanted to shake, but the steel did the shaking for them. No whistle. I waited for the long note that tells a driver he has not been forgotten. Nothing but the bees and a far radio from the orchard gift shop advertising apple butter. The hum rose a little more, then settled as if a heavy thing had decided to take its time. Approach, I said, for the tape. No horn yet. Wind arrived all at once and laid the grass flat along the ditch. Pollen ran like powder over the ground and marked my boots. A shadow moved over the rows of trees, then past me, then swept the cut below. It had the shape of a train without the body. A long rectangle of darker day broken by smaller rectangles in a line, like windows that remember what glass used to be. It flowed uphill along the curve, the way water flows when it wants to be air. My heart carried on as if nothing strange had happened. My mouth went dry anyway. The recorder's needle lifted, dropped, lifted, then hovered at a polite notch below red, as if the day itself were talking very softly. "Clear it, McKinney," said a voice from nowhere, clipped and tired as if pressed out of old wire. "Copy," said another. "Mind the trestle?" I looked toward the trestle that arches over the lower leg of the loop. Nothing stood on it but sunlight. Still, the boards under the rail dipped a hair and the bolts muttered like old men agreeing about the weather. A bee fell out of the air beside me the way a loose button falls from a shirt. It got up slow and flew again, embarrassed. "Where's your horn?" I said, not expecting an answer, and got one anyway. "It sounds for warning," said a woman's voice behind me. "Not for cameras," I turned. A woman in denim overalls and a blue cap stood with a picking sack tied around her waist. Her hair was white and braided down her back, thick as rope. Her face had that good mountain look, eyes that hold everything and hands that set nothing down in a hurry. "They told you not to come for the whistle," she said, stepping over the fence with the ease of someone who has done it all her life. "But folks hear what they want." "I came for the loops," I said. "And for a quiet train." "Then you're on time," she said. "The quiet ones keep better schedules than the loud. You want a name to put in your book?" "I already said mine," I told her. She smiled in a way that felt like the sun coming out. "Not warm, clear. Names for the tracks," she said. "They don't read the air. They read paper." She pulled a little company book from her sack, the kind clerks used to keep script tallies in. It was soft with handling. She opened to a blank line. The page looked black, but when I leaned close, I saw coal dust pressed into the paper like night shaken out flat. "Write it," she said. "The rail minds those who announce themselves." I wrote my name. The letters looked too white at first and then sank, taking on the page's dark as if my name had remembered where it was born. She nodded. "Altipass," she said, tapping her chest. "My people picked here. My daddy blew the horn for my mama's funeral when the company let him." She set something small in my palm, a round dull coin stamped CRRCO, scrip. The number on it were the last 4 digits of my father's social. I had not said that number to anyone. "How?" "Tracks carry what we can't," she said. "You're carrying more than you know. Hear that?" The hum stiffened. The rails sang higher and the air around my knees turned cold. The curve below blurred like heat on a road, but this was a cool blur, like looking through lake water. The woman, Altipass, stepped back to give space to a thing with no body. I did the same. My recorder took the hint and clicked its reels along in a steady working rhythm. Bees went quiet. The apple leaves turned their pale sides up. Far off, a crossing bell at a road we could not see hammered out its warning, steady as a heart that does not know it has failed. The leaves of the closest tree shivered. In the shiver I saw for a breath a carriage window where the world should be. A rectangle of a different day, snow on a platform, a man in a hat I recognized from my grandfather's photos. He stared straight through me at someone on the other side of my life. Then the picture passed. The hum eased. The rail under my fingers sighed. The crossing bell cut off mid-swing. "No horn," I said, not sure to whom I spoke. "The quiet ones don't blow for the living," Altipass said softly. "Sometimes they blow after. Sometimes they wait until the jar is set down." I touched the glass jar in my jacket pocket without meaning to. It was the one I had taken from the woman at Coffin Creek. I had promised to open it only when the wind called my name and meant it right. The jar was cool, but a slow fog began to bead the inside as if a patient mouth had breathed there. "Don't feed it unless you mean to ride," she cautioned. "Ride what?" "You already feel it," she said. "Why assign it a word? Words make a gate. The quiet train wants space, not names." We walked down to the trestle together. The wood was gray, new boards spliced into old where floods had taken bites. I lay a hand on the brace and felt an ache that did not belong to me, the ache of a long back bent for a long time. The figure-8 loop crossed itself above us. A swallow darted under, changed its mind, and went around the long way. "Where does it go?" I asked. "Same place every train goes," she said. "Away, then back. But the quiet ones prefer the part between away and back. They live in the turn." On the far bank, kids' laughter rose, then fell flat, the way a record drops into a warp. I looked and saw nobody. The jar fogged a little more. In the fog I could make out a pattern, 4 long marks like fingers on glass. "You carry breath," Altipas said, "and a light. And now a coin. You're a walking storehouse. Careful what accounts you settle. When the ledger gets nervous, it will send the 7th to help." "The 7th, pallbearer," I said. "I heard a step last night." "You'll hear it clearer here," she said, and then she turned her face toward the curve and listened. I listened too. The rail quieted. The valley filled with ordinary sound. Bees again, a truck on the highway, a man coughing in the orchard. But on top of all that, I heard it. 6 soft drum beats up the grade like men setting a box down to rest. Then late a 7th, gentle but firm, agreeing to help without being asked. The hair on my arms rose. My father had been a strong man. He taught me that there are weights you can carry, and weights you can only move with a prayer and a second pair of hands. I did not know which kind this was. Altipas put the company book back in her sack. "Go to the culvert," she said. "You'll see the place where sound folds up. If you're to follow, that is where you step in." The culvert was a stone tunnel that passed under the high leg of the loop. Water ran thin through it, bright where the sun lay, black where it didn't. I crouched and put my head inside. The world changed size. The same way a room changes when the person you are afraid of enters it. The pebbles on the bottom clicked as if shuffled by small feet. "Long, long, short, long," I said, just to test the shape of the place. The culvert gave me the pattern back. But as breath not sound, 4 long cold rushes, then a quick one, then another long. My mouth filled with the taste of creosote and apple skin. I pulled back hard, knocking my shoulder on stone. The jar in my jacket bumped my ribs. My hands wanted to open it. I clenched them until I felt the coin's edges bite. "Don't," said Altipas from the daylight. "If you promise air, you promise passage. You'll go where it goes." "Where is that?" I asked. She looked at me the way an elder looks at a child who is asking the right question too soon. "Back through what you didn't finish," she said, "and along what your people left undone." The rails began to sing again, not loud but certain. The wind picked up the grass, set it down, picked it up. On the hill, the orchard crew stopped in a natural way, as if all at once they remembered something they had to think about before they could work some more. "Clear at Altipas," said the wire-thin voice again, from nowhere and everywhere. "Hold at the trestle, riders at the culvert." I did not like the word rider with no engine in view. It is one thing to board a car you can see. It is another to hand yourself to a shape on faith. "Why me?" I asked. "You were on the list before you were born," Altipas said gently. "Your family borrowed light and air. The tracks hold more than timber and coal. They hold ledger lines. You can step aside. Somebody will step in. That's how hills stay upright." I imagined my uncle setting his carbide lamp down. I imagined my father lifting with his back those years after the mine when the plant took him in. I imagined old women counting coins with gloves on, so the metal wouldn't learn their skin. I heard 6 footsteps. Then the 7th again, patient. The way a man waits at the door of a house he has carried into the ground already and is willing to carry back out if asked. The recorder clicked once without my hand. The counter jumped ahead 1 minute I had not lived yet. I felt that minute land in my chest like a small stone. The jar fogged fully. The glass turned milk white. Under the fog came a sound like a horn played underwater. 1 long note, distant, turned in on itself, too tired to warn, strong enough to insist. A shadow like a car door opened in the air at the mouth of the culvert. Steps rattled down to meet the gravel without making a mark. They stopped where my boots were. I did not see wood or steel. I saw the shape of permission. "On board," said a man in my father's voice and not in his voice, both at once. I felt a pressure at my elbow, the way a conductor would guide you without touching. Altipas did not move. Her eyes were wet, but from wind, not tears. She nodded once, a blessing or a warning. "Wait for the quiet trains," she said softly. "They carry you where you've already been." Behind me, up on the loop, the apple leaves turned again the way a crowd turns its head when a bride enters a church. Down here, the culvert breathed cold into my boots. The seventh step landed just behind my right heel and held there. Offering, I lifted my foot. The gravel under me rose by the thickness of a stair. The jar in my pocket warmed as if a hand inside it took mine. Did not say yes. The tape needle hit red and stayed there as something not seen. Leaned close enough to fog the viewfinder, and a long, watery whistle began where no horn should be. Story 3, Coffin Creek and the Breath in a Jar. The road to Coffin Creek looks like a mistake the county never fixed. It narrows without warning, turns twice where the map shows once, and ends beside two poplars that lean toward each other like tired men. Past them, the creek drops into a slit in the rock so tight a body couldn't turn around inside it. Folks call it coffin because it keeps the shape of a box and because in flood, it groans like someone pushing against a lid. I parked where the gravel gave up and sat with the engine off until my heartbeat matched the slow talk of water under stone. I do this before any recording, the old habit of letting a place finish its sentence before I start mine. When you rush a mountain, it remembers. The woman who told me about the jar had said, "Go see Granny May up the branch. She keeps a breath for a man who couldn't spare one." Directions were not an address, but a recipe. Cross the foot log, count 3 rhododendron clumps. Look for the porch with a skillet ring burned into a plastic table. The trail was soft and dark and close. Spider silk caught at my sleeves like whispered warnings. The creek beside me was a voice talking to itself in a low room, and every now and then it would laugh once, a bright splash, then hush as if someone had put a finger to its mouth. Granny May answered before I knocked. She watched me through a screen door that made her face into little squares of old time. "Documentary man," she said, as if I were a type of weather. Her eyes were creekwater gray with a brown leaf in each, and her hands were clever the way a fox is clever, busy without hurrying. On the table sat a jar older than both of us, glass bubbled like cold sap, lid dented by teeth. Something clear lived inside. It did not slosh when she moved it. It held itself like a stubborn idea. "You brought that brown mountain smell," she said, sniffing. "Lantern on your skin. And railroad on your shoes." She set the jar between us and tapped its lid with her fingernail. The sound was small and certain. "This here is a kept breath. You got anyone who taught you to keep one?" "My father," I said. When he went in the mine, he'd save air in his cheeks like a boy. Said it reminded him that breathing was work. "That's the mountain's math," she said. "Everything counted. Light, air, footfalls, names. Some men borrow more than they can pay back. When the tallyman comes, they set one thing aside to settle the difference." She put her palm on the jar like a blessing. He caught his last full breath and hid it, thinking to pay his way when the ledger came. But ledgers don't eat air. People do, so it sat, and the creek learned to talk to it. "What happens if it's opened? You hear what you forgot," she said, "and what you owe answers out loud." She squinted at me. "You carry a debt that isn't yours. You've been opening doors with your mouth." I looked at my hands, the lines of dust in the knuckles from the Clinchfield trestle, the faint smudge of soot I had not washed from the apple rose. "I came to listen," I said, and hated how small it sounded. "Listening is paying," she said kindly. "But don't pay with your yes unless the wind says your name right." "How will I know?" "You'll know because it'll stand up on 2 legs and cast a shadow," she said. "Sound that has a body is the sort you answer." She slid the jar nearer. "Pick it up." It was cool like the heart of a well, not cold, not warm. Heavy, but not the heavy of water. The weight felt arranged like tools in a chest. The glass was clouded in places where other hands had held it. I put my ear near the lid. I heard a canary for a second, sharp, bright, living on the edge of panic. Then I heard silence thick as bread. Behind that faint, a single cough the color of coal dust. My father cleared his throat that way after the mine. When he moved to the plant and said the air there was light as pie. "You hear him," she said, as if reading my face. "I hear a life," I said. "Same thing most days." She took the jar back long enough to set it in a shallow bowl. "Open it a breath, not more. Let the creek speak through it before you claim anything." She smiled without showing teeth. "Things go better if the water speaks first." I turned the lid 3 slow degrees. It stuck, then let go with a soft gummy pop like a kiss removed. The room leaned to the left, the distance of one old ripple in plaster. From the mouth of the jar came not a rush but a reach, air moving toward my mouth with intent. It touched my lips like a question. I did not say yes. I did not say no. The breath slid into me anyway, thin as thread and strong as wire. For a moment I tasted my mother's kitchen after rain and the bitter metal of a new key. I had the dizzy feeling you get when you step back on a dock after a long boat ride. As if the floor had learned a different motion while you were gone. The creek outside hit a rock wrong and said my surname, then corrected itself and said it kinder. I felt a second breath, older, slower, arrive from the jar and settle in the corners of my chest, sweeping like a careful broom. Behind it came my uncle's laugh, short and surprised, and the squeal of mule leather. The breath was not taking. It was setting something back where it belonged. My hand stopped shaking without my permission. Enough, Granny said softly. Put it back to bed. I screwed the lid on. The jar misted once from the inside and then cleared. It refills, I said, because that seemed less frightening than the other words in my mouth. It invites, she corrected. The creek lens, same as any family. It asks for company in return. You'll owe a sit-down by the water. She turned the jar a quarter inch as if aligning a compass. You'll open it when the wind says your name all the way through with no weather in it. Not today, maybe, but soon. What do I give it? I asked. Air, she said. Work, you're quiet. It doesn't need your blood. It gets plenty of that from the hill. If you must leave something else, leave a coin. Not money. A promise. She pointed to the script coin I had kept from the loops. That'll do. It already knows you. The creek spelled a letter in the doorway and then the next. I did not let it finish. I thanked her. She nodded and slid the jar toward me. Take it, she said. It wants new rooms to sit in. Don't keep it in a bag with keys. It likes a coat pocket. It likes to feel ribs. I left with the jar under my jacket and the coin in my fist. The path down felt longer than the path up, and the light coming through Laurel had the color of water poured from a jar and held to sun. At the footlog, I stood a while. The creek had lost some of its talk. It muttered now like someone deciding whether to forgive. Coffin Creek is narrowest where two boulders lean together and make a door. The water squeezes through there with a long, even sound. On a flood day, it pounds. Today it breathed. I set my recorder on a flat rock and clicked it on. The reels took the murmur without complaint. My watch ticked true. The jar lay warm against my ribs. I waited for my name to arrive all at once with the edges right. It came wrong, then right, then in a third way that was neither. It came from under the slab where crawdads keep their clean apartments. It came from high in the laurel where the oldest leaves hold dust from the summer my father was born. It came out of my own mouth in a whisper I didn't intend. The creek did not imitate. It answered. Between the two boulders, the air thickened as if a person had set their shoulder there. I took the jar out and set it in the thin sheet of water where the current could learn the shape of glass. The lid fogged and cleared in a slow rhythm. I unscrewed it a little. The jar breathed. Once. Out. The creek breathed in as if relieved. In that breath I heard the Clinchfield whistle pattern with no sound, only the muscle of the idea. I heard the Brown Mountain lantern lean against my palm again. I heard my father say my given name the way he said it when he wanted me to pay attention without shame. Behind me, up the bank, a seventh footstep landed in dry leaves and did not hurry to lift. Don't smile, a voice said, and I recognized the warning from the grade the night before. I kept my mouth slack and my eyes on the water. What do you want? I asked the creek. Return, it said in the voice of moving water that has learned to pronounce one word. The sound came from everywhere and inside the jar. Return what was borrowed. Light? Air? My voice felt too bright here. I kept it low. Breath, it said. And time. The current tightened around my ankles as if it were choosing a polite grip. I don't own either, I said. I carry them. That is ownership enough for mountains, the water said. You will pay by standing still while the long things pass. The jar exhaled again. The creek level dropped the height of a dime. Stones that had not been stones a minute ago showed their backs like old turtles. The recorder clicked without my hand. Granny May's words returned. You'll open it when the wind says your name with no weather in it. The air felt flat as a church fan. No temperature, no scent. Everything took a step closer to its own quiet. My name arrived again, this time like a signature laid over mine by a more practiced hand. It spelled me right, down to the middle letter where folks often stumble. It did not bring wind. It brought room, as if the day had made space for me to choose. I opened the jar wider. It did not rush. It received. The breath came up into me and out through me like a bellows working a far fire. I tasted iron, then peaches from a jar, then chalk. My chest learned a set of ribs it did not own before. My head filled with the sound of the mine roof creaking, a warning my father knew how to read. The creak spoke again, this time in a voice I had not heard since the day in the plant parking lot when he told me he would not live to be an old man. "Hold the light for me," he said, not pleading. "Working." "I will," I said, and felt the jar dear to my hands the way a tool is dear when it fits. The seventh step came closer. It did not crowd me. It offered to carry some of the weight if I would allow it. I kept my mouth closed and breathed through my nose like a man under a load. From the undercut bank across the channel, where roots dangled like the beards of drowned kings, another voice began. Not my father's, not any name I knew. It spoke the valley's old arithmetic. Debts, balances, interest paid in footfalls and late paid in rooms added to houses that should have been finished long ago. "You have taken air that is not yours, and you have offered it back," it said. "That is good work. The ledger recognizes it." "What else?" I said. "What remains?" "The minute the loop took," it said. "The step you will owe. The coin you will leave where the wind writes." It paused, and in its pause I heard water dripping through coal. "You can refuse. The mountain will wait. It has always been patient." I took the script coin from my pocket and set it on the flat stone that juts into the narrow. The coin did not shine. It darkened and clung as if the rock had been thirsty. The jar pulled once more at my mouth and then rested. The creak climbed back the height of that dime and no higher. There was kindness in that. It frightened me more than anger. Behind me, the seventh step lifted. It set down again, close enough to share breath if it had breath to share. The day went hushed in a way that is not silence but attention. I knew if I turned I would see nothing, and also I would see the space where something was choosing to be. "Say yes," said the voice under the bank, and the word yes landed in the jar with a knock like bone on glass. I tightened my hand around the lid. Wind would have helped then. Any small weather would have broken the trance, but the air stayed polite and blank. I looked at the recorder's reels turning. I looked at the coin on the stone. I looked at the slit between the two boulders where the creek pushed its patient shoulder through. My name rose one more time, correct, whole, and without any sky in it. I slid the jar into the center of the current and set my fingers on the lid. The creek inhaled. Story 4. Goatman at the Switchback Grade. The switchback looks harmless in daylight, a polite zigzag on a contour line, but at night, it feels like a thought you can't finish. I came up to Unaka again at the hour when fog lifted out of the ditches like something putting on a coat. The sign said trucks use lower gear, and I did, even though I wasn't hauling. I parked nose out in the gravel of a runaway ramp and let my hazard lights blink against the mist. 2 slow orange heartbeats. The mountain did its steady breathing. Far below, a river moved without sound. I shut the engine and listened. A new tape. Fresh batteries. My notes from Coffin Creek tucked under the visor. The coal script coin warm in my pocket as if it had learned my temperature. The jar sat against my ribs, cool and calm, the way a tool sits when it trusts you. The air had that penny taste again, and a hint of wet hair like a dog came in out of a storm and shook just out of sight. My father's voice crossed my mind. 3 points of safety, eyes, ears, distance. I kept all 3. August 11th, I said to the tape. Switchback grade. Runaway ramp pull-off. My name is, I said it. I made myself say it plain. No joke in it. Names are gates out here, and gates are for opening and closing, not for play. The handheld on my seat hissed and came alive without my thumb on the transmitter. Breaker 19, a voice said, low and flat. You the fellow with the jars? I kept my own voice easy. Copy, documentarian. Don't show your teeth, the voice said. He thinks it's a challenge. Him who? I asked, though I knew. Climb up on your bumper, the voice said. Turn around first. Face the grade, I climbed. My hazard light stitched my boots in orange. Mist was passing the guardrail in long, steady sets. Tense and release as if the road were a muscle and the mountain were testing it. From up here, the downgrade fell into a blind turn. The gravel of the ramp was clean, as if trucks practiced panic and left no trace. Across the way, the silver rail sang once like a tuning fork touched and let go. What am I looking for? I murmured, mostly to set something steady on the tape. You'll know, the voice said. He doesn't arrive like a body. He arrives like an intention. I saw marks first. The top rail's paint was shaved into bright lines, as if something had plucked it with a black-nailed finger. In the fence above it, caught on a twist, a long hair hung, coarse, wiry, dark as a wet tire cord. A shape moved in the fog the way a question moves in a crowded room. Everything else made space for it. Horns came last, not as decoration but as a decision. A man's height and more. A weight that did not hurry. The pupils, when the eyes found my bumper, were wrong. Not round. Not human, not goat either, but crossed. Like two cuts someone made in a map to show where not to go. I remembered the warning too late, and my mouth did what my face has always done when I'm afraid. It showed my teeth for friendliness. The shape tilted, curious, a fraction past polite. Easy, the CB voice said. Keep your lips aligned. Don't aim your brightness at him. I smoothed my face like I was ironing a shirt. My mouth learned stillness. The shape eased. It came to the guardrail and set a hand on it. Not a hoof, not yet. A hand. Long fingers, rough hair to the knuckles, nails like black horn. It plucked the rail. The sound carried down the switchback and up into the trees. It wasn't a note. It was a measure of attention. Once, twice, three. The fourth dragged and stopped. Long, short, long, and a truck far below downshifted out of respect, or out of sympathy. Headlights never showed. What do you want? I asked. Not loud, because my father taught me how to talk to animals that could hurt you. My mouth stayed aligned. My eyes watched like fences watch. It plucked again, and the pluck said, Count. A hoof came down in the gravel, precise and sure, not more weight than necessary, drawing a crescent in the dust. Then the other. They were careful feet. They were feet that knew steels and ledges and the shelf of the world where the world ends. You want the seventh step, I said. The sound of my own voice sounded like a stone put on a ledger page to keep it from curling in a draft. The pupils crossed a little tighter as if lining up a shot. Don't say the number again, the CB voice warned. He counts. He likes when you make his work simple. The jar under my coat fogged once, then cleared. It had learned to be polite unless spoken to first. It wanted to breathe for me. I put my palm over it as if over a child's chest. Not yet. The goatman, because there wasn't any other honest word now, shifted his hand higher on the rail and walked the plucked tone down the length of metal, testing for loose bolts for weakness the way my father tapped a plank with his knuckles before he stepped onto it. The smell of ozone came with it, that lightning smell before rain when you can feel the air decide to be a different air. A pair of headlights appeared in the lower curve at last. They came slow, and the engine note stayed deep like a man humming in a church doorway. The driver lifted before the turn and drifted through, no brake lights, no horn. The truck passed under the guardrail sound as if under a string pulled tight in a child's bedroom. The goatman's head turned a fraction to watch it go, then returned to me. Do you know my family? I asked, because that was the honest business that had brought me this far. Do you walk between the box and the ground when my people carry wrong? It plucked the rail in a pattern that remembered Brown Mountain, two lights pacing each other on a ridge. Then it plucked the clinch field. No horn where horn ought to be, only the muscle of a whistle in the air. Then it put one finger on the steel and held it without moving, and the grade returned the pressure like a note you can see but not hear. I held up the coin. It warmed so quick my palm sweated. Payment, I said, for what was owed. The goatman did not take it. He looked at it the way elders look at a child's first offering, pleased but with a sadness you feel in your teeth. He tapped the coin with a nail. The tap was gentle, but the coin rang like a dropped spoon and turned the exact color of road. I set it at the base of the milepost. It sank a hair as if the asphalt had been thirsty. The CB voice softened. Good, you're buying a little quiet. What if he wants more than quiet? I said. He wants what walks between the six and the ground, the voice said, the words careful and even. He wants to be invited. He wants to be asked. I heard 6 steps on dry leaves behind my right heel, then a 7th, kind and late. The seat in my truck moved a half-inch as if someone had leaned a hand there to watch. I did not turn. Everything inside me wanted to be watched by my own face. I didn't give it that. The goatman lifted his hand from the rail and opened it toward me. The gesture wasn't human, but the meaning was. A bargain offered without speech. It was the old mountain exchange. weight for passage, step for step. The jar in my coat took a breath on its own and exhaled against my ribs. The air around my mouth tightened the way air tightens before you dive. I remembered Granny May's rule. Not unless the wind says your name with no weather in it. The wind said nothing now. The grade said everything. I climbed down and stood in the gravel with him, close enough to smell a barn that had never seen daylight, close enough to read my blurred reflection in the shine of a horn that had not been polished in a century. The pupils crossed me out. I kept my lips aligned and offered the only thing I had that wasn't breath. Attention. I put it out like a hand. Show me the safe road, I said. I won't follow uphill. He cocked his head, just that. The kind of small decision that tells you a thing is listening. He turned to the guardrail and plucked, and this time the sound made a picture. A circle, incomplete, broken at one point the size of a boot. He set one hoof on the ground and drew a crescent, then another, until the crescents made almost a ring around my truck. He left a gap at the driver's door. A pen, I said, or a pasture. For keeping things where they belong. Or keeping you where you promised to be, the CB voice said. Circles are old math. Step out wrong and you write yourself an extra problem. The hazard lights clicked slower, then faster, then settled into a rhythm that matched the plucks. The grade all at once had too many corners. The switchback had grown an extra switchback that did not exist on my map. A turn that kept turning. Acceptable only if you were too tired to insist otherwise. He took one step toward the gap and waited for me to accept or refuse. The seventh behind me matched the weight with a patience that bruised. You can say no, the voice said, but later, it may not be you who pays for the no. I thought about the house in Lost Cove adding rooms while no one was looking. I thought of the culvert that breathed patterns into my mouth. I thought of the jar which had learned my heartbeat and wanted only to help me breathe through it. The coin at the milepost darkened to match the post. It had chosen a side. Tell me what you want carried, I said. The goatman lifted one hand and set his nail on his throat. He drew a slow line down to his chest and pressed. Then he set 2 fingers on the guardrail again and plucked not a note but a calendar. 6 marks and a space where a 7th should stand. He waited. Time, I said. Minutes, steps. He did not nod. He did nothing that simple. He let the grade answer for him. A truck below downshifted into a gear I did not know existed and made no noise. The fog leaned the way fog leans when something large has moved through it. The guardrail smelled like thunder. The 7th step took a long breath right behind my ear. Okay, I said, and the word landed in the jar like a pebble. The jar warmed. The glass misted. The world lost one color and then gave it back. He moved first. He never touched me. He did not need to. The crescents in the gravel joined at the gap and became a whole circle with me inside it, and the truck inside it and the jar between. The hazard lights dimmed. The CB went quiet. The mountain kept breathing. In the quiet, I heard a knock from the center of the switchback, one polite as if from under a river. I opened my door and slid into the seat. The passenger belt rose and crossed a hollow where there was no body. It clicked. The jar fogged hard enough to blur the dash. The 7th footfall settled gently on the mat. The goatman leaned his head into the beam of my headlight and turned his face until his pupils met the glass. They crossed my reflection out. He plucked the rail one last time. Long, long, short, long, the whistle with no horn. Down the grade, a new curve appeared as clean as a sentence written by a careful hand. It led not left, not right, but into fog that held itself like a door. Drive, said my father's voice from the nothing sitting beside me. I put the truck in gear. I eased into the road that wasn't on the map. Behind us, where the circle had been open, gravel shifted as if a heavy thing had decided to step in after all. Story 5. The house that adds one more room. Lost Cove wasn't on my plan for that day. The road from the switchback broke into fog and set me down where the map kept its mouth shut. I parked at the Unica pull-off and felt the jar under my jacket cool as if it had found a cellar. The script coin I'd left at Coffin Creek, then left again at the milepost, sat back in my pocket without asking, damp as creek stone. That's how you know the mountain is keeping books. What you pay returns until the ledger is satisfied. The path into Lost Cove is a long breath out. Laurel crowds your elbows and every step sounds like a memory agreeing with itself. I walked the ridge until the trees eased back and the land stepped down in terraces. Old gardens, a bright green quilt thrown over the ribs of a town. The Nullichucky lay far below, a silver thread sewing two pieces of country together. Ruins held themselves politely. No dramatic collapse, just houses keeping their shape out of habit. If a place can be lonely and brave at once, Lost Cove is both. The house I came for sits above a fallen orchard, on a bench of ground that seems to be saving up for something. The first time I saw it, I was 20 and thought ruin was romantic. It had 3 rooms then. When I came at 35 to film the schoolhouse door that swings in windless weather, the house had 4. Today it had 5. I don't mean a lean-to nailed on. I mean an extra room inside the walls. The way a story makes room for itself in a family and nobody remembers how it got in. I didn't go straight in. I walked the orchard rows and read the trees like gravestones. Someone had nailed a jar ring to a limb years ago. The bark had eaten the circle clean and left a brass scar. The jar under my coat fogged once and cleared, like a man waking and deciding to sleep again. I breathed with the hill until my ribs matched its slow count. Then I climbed the porch and opened the door. It never sticks. That's what I hate. Rot has no manners. It should creak and complain. This door opens like a decision someone already made for you. Inside held cold. Not weather cold, but the chill of places where language thins. Dust lay even as flour. A picture still hung where I had seen it years ago. 3 men in hats and a dog with a white blaze, the corner burned. A plate with blue flowers watched from a shelf, cracked through the middle like a stopped conversation. In a corner, a Bible sat fat with clippings and seed packets, preacher and farmer fighting to share the same paper. The floorboards remembered weight. You can tell by how they give and take under boots, polite but firm. 1, 2, 3 rooms like before. A 4th with a side window that used to look at a tree now gone. Beyond a doorway that hadn't been a doorway, the 5th room waited. It shouldn't have been there. The exterior walls would have forbidden it. But houses in hollers don't ask permission from drawings. The 5th room was long and narrow, as if it had been pulled like taffy. No window. Light came in anyway, or pretended to, from nowhere in particular. Halfway down, a table waited with an object placed in the exact middle. A cassette labeled in my father's hand. The rounded letters he used when he was careful. He had written the name he used when I was small and still came to him when he whistled. The same tape did not exist the last time I was here. I put my recorder on the floor and pressed red. The reels began their soft work. August 12th, I said. Lost Cove, house above the orchard. 5 rooms. I said my name for the room as much as for the tape. My voice came back different, thinner but more certain, like a promise made by a tired man. The wall at the far end of the room had a line down it, hair thin, floor to ceiling. Not a crack, a seam. I would swear it hadn't been there a second before. As I watched, the line widened the width of a breath, then rested. The jar under my jacket fogged hard and stayed clouded, as if whatever was behind the seam were breathing for both of us. I went down the length slow. The house listened. Houses do that. They learn your weight and decide whether to carry it. The 5th room had no dust underfoot. It felt new all the way to my toes. I stopped at the table. I didn't touch the cassette. I wanted to. My father's handwriting pulls at me like a creek crossing at dusk. You know you shouldn't, and you also know you will. Why add a room? I asked the air. It wasn't a question for the camera. It was for whatever kept the keys to this frame. The answer came as weight, not words, a pressure behind my knees that made them want to bend. The 7th footstep I'd felt on the grade placed itself on the threshold behind me and did not enter. It was patient. It was offering to help. The seam in the wall breathed again and opened a finger width more. I kept my mouth a line. The goatman's warning had taught me that. Don't shine your teeth at things that count differently. I reached to the cassette and stopped an inch above it. The plastic was cool without touching. It felt like a mouth. Or like the lid of a jar not yet told what to contain. I took my hand away. You don't eat tape, I said out loud to steady myself. You eat steps and breathe. My father would have laughed at that. He used to say houses eat everything, given time. They even eat for their own reasons. The recorder's needle rose as if the room had smiled. A sound I knew came from the seam. The long, watery whistle the loops had given me without a horn. It didn't fill the room. It filled a smaller place right behind my eyes. I saw my childhood desk under my bedroom window, the hill beyond, sunlight that doesn't belong to any year I can prove. The seam widened another fraction. On the other hand, the desk from my memory came into real shape. A cheap cassette player sat on it, the one I saved for as a boy. It was plugged into nothing. The play button depressed with no finger. The little capstan turned with the steady faith of machines. Don't, I told myself. Don't make a door into a mouth. But the house had already made itself a throat. The fifth room took a small step forward under my boots. No visible movement. The kind of slide you feel in your calves like a ferry drifting on its line when a wake passes. From the doorway, where the fifth room met the fourth, the seventh step came closer and stopped again. It did not crowd me. It waited to see which part of the weight I'd choose. That's what help is in these hills. Not a hand grabbing, but a hand ready if you ask in the right tone. I turned my head just enough to see the entrance. The hallway outside had grown shorter by an inch. Not an optical trick. The stair shadow told the truth. Houses that add rooms take what they need from what's there. Somebody somewhere pays for every extra space. I owe what I owe, I said, not brave, just tired of walking around the fact. But I don't know the bill. The cassette player on the other side of the seam clicked. My name came in my father's voice. Not the angry voice. The working one. The voice he used when he asked you to hand him something heavy and didn't want to make it sound like a command. "Hold the light a while for me," he said. The brown mountain lantern warmed my palm from memory. The jar at my ribs cooled until I ached. I reached into my pocket and found the coin again, damp as if it had been swimming. I set it on the table by the tape and it did what coin has done all week. It darkened and took on the color of whatever would claim it. The table wood drank its outline. The coin sunk half a penny's width and stopped. On the wall behind me, a small scratch began. Metal on plaster, patient, drawing a curve. I didn't need to look. I knew the shape. It would be a circle, almost closed, with a gap big enough for a boot. The safe pen, or the pen that keeps you correctly unsafe. The goatman had drawn it with his hooves at the grade. The house was drawing it with whatever nails pass for hooves indoors. I put my hands on the table, and the table agreed to hold me up. "Show me what's owed," I said to the seam. The seam opened another inch. Enough for a thought to pass through and make a decision before I could catch it. Beyond, my desk looked like I'd never left. A pencil I used to chew was there. Teeth marks like little notches on a life. A spiral notebook lay open to a page where my boy handwriting had tried to make sense of a horn pattern and had turned it into a prayer. On the sill sat a mason jar with its lid off, fogged from the inside. My small tape player played nothing. The counter turned anyway. If arresting time was a sin, I had been a sinner young. "Don't step," said a voice behind me. And the breath carried coal dust I'd grown up loving and hating. It wasn't a command. It was a kindness afraid of itself. "I always step," I said. That's what got me hired. And the joke landed nowhere and did not echo. The fifth room lengthened another board's worth. Houses do not move except when they do. The seam invited. The seventh step leaned. No sound. Just the sensation of someone willing to take your end of the box if you nod. Granny May's rules lined up like fence posts in my mind. Don't open unless the wind speaks your name right. Pay with quiet. Leave a coin where the wind writes. I had done 2 of those 3. My name had been said by water with no weather in it. The wind here was not wind. It was the lack of wind. The kind of still that makes people speak scriptures or do something foolish to break it. "Dad," I said. It seemed right to call him that here. "If I carry this, what do I set down?" The recorder on my floor made a small click as if answering, "You set down nothing, you add." That is the math here. The seam's edge showed a polished toe of a boot, the exact shape of the 7th man's place beside a coffin when the grade steepens and a shoulder is needed. It waited to become an entire man or remain a suggestion depending on what I did next. The circle scratch behind me reached its gap and paused, the sound holding like breath before a prayer. I did not pick up the cassette. I did not step through. I did the only honest thing left. I took the jar from my jacket and set it on the seam, half in the 5th room, half in the other. The glass fogged in halves, my side clear, the desk side white. I unscrewed the lid the amount Granny had taught me. A breath passed from the room where I stood into the room I used to live in. For 1 second, the 2 airs knew each other. For 1 second, the house did not know which room to eat. The scratch resumed behind me and completed the circle. The gap closed like a stitched wound. The door at the front of the house, the one that never sticks, shut itself with a careful sound, as if a respectful person had entered and didn't want to disturb anything. The seventh step came through the doorway and sat down beside me, not touching, ready. The boot toe in the seam lifted, a man deciding whether to enter his own boyhood. "Hold the light," said my father's voice from the desk, and from the jar, and from the grain of the table. "I am," I said, though my hands were empty. The seam opened the width of a hand. The new room began to add itself, board by patient board, toward me. Story 6. Widow's Hollow and the Names in the Wind. The path to Widow's Hollow runs along a pasture rim where the hill forgets to be steep for a while and gives you a place to think. I came after the house in Lost Cove began to make a new room out of my silence. The jar against my ribs had cooled the way cellars do at noon. The coin I thought I had left on a table was back in my pocket, dark as road tar. I did not ask how. When a mountain returns what you paid, it means you paid the wrong thing or not enough. Folks around here tell a rule about the hollow. They say the wind at the rim speaks names in the order a life can bear. First your surname and you get a year. Then your given name and you get a season. Then your whole name clean with no weather in it and you get one more step. Some make jokes about it at the store. None of them joke standing at the rim. I took off my hat because that is how my father talked to land. The grass on the lip was cropped short by cattle that would not go down into the bowl. The hollow itself lay like an old bruise, green going thin around the edges, bare in the center where nothing had a mind to grow. A sin-eater used to come here, the older men said. He would set bread and beer on a flat stone, eat and drink for the dead, and take the worst of what they owed into himself. He died early and heavy, loved and feared in equal measure. On the stone near the rim I could see faint scratches where plates had kissed in weather. I set the cassette recorder on my coat and let the reels start their soft work. August 13th, I said. Widow's Hollow. Rim. I said my name the way a man tells a court who he is. The wind shifted and I felt my own syllables come back lighter than I sent them, as if someone had skimmed off shame and kept it for later. On the first pass around the rim, the hollow was just a place. Bird stitched between fence posts. A hawk rode its thought in a tight circle and would not cross the middle. On the second pass, the wind collected itself and spoke my surname. Not loud, not dramatic. It laid the name down like a folded shirt, neat and unavoidable. It pronounced it right. The vowels lined up the way my grandfather said them, the old way with the mountain in them. 1 year, I said under my breath, because saying nothing sometimes feels like taking more than your share. On the third pass, the wind tried my given name and missed. Sweetly, the way an ant does at Christmas. I heard the jar in my jacket loosen a little in its ring of cloth, the glass tapping twice against my ribs as if nodding. I did not open it. I walked and kept my mouth in a line. Somewhere below, a cow bellowed once and then decided against it. On the fourth pass, the wind spelled it right. Not a gust. Not a trick. It said my given name with the cadence my mother used when she wanted me to pay attention without fear. The air felt flat, like a church fan waving in a room where nobody sweats. No smell of clover, no dust, just a clean blankness where choices make a sound. My watch ticked 2 long seconds, then caught up in 3 quick ones, a little apology. I set the coin on the sin-eater's stone. It did what it had done at Coffin Creek and on the Clinchfield milepost. It darkened, sank a hair, and went quiet, like a dog lying down where it belongs. I put my palm on it and felt the cool that means receipt acknowledged. That ought to buy me a question, I said, and the wind, polite, did not answer. I walked down the slope. Every step made the same small sound in the grass. Midway, where the ground wanted to twist my ankle, it did not. The hollow was doing sums on me. I could feel it in my knees. The jar warmed and cooled in little pulses, matching a breath I was not yet taking. At the center lay a ring where nothing grew. Not salt, not moss. Just plain earth without an idea. A devil's circle, the old people called it. But they did not say devil like a sermon. They said it with carpentry in their voices, like scribe your line or leave an allowance. The circle was the size of a kitchen table, a place for meals or meetings you couldn't finish. I stood at the edge and set the recorder on the bare dirt. Its reels turned steady. The needle sat up as if listening. Widow's Hollow, I said to the ring. I came to ask what I owe. I kept my tone the way a son keeps his hat off in a house that fed him. The wind breathed down the bowl, then stopped short shy of the center. Breath, it said, with the voice of a place that has learned a single word and is proud to have it right. And time. I have both, but not to spend, I said. I carry them. You know whose? We do, the wind said. And there was the creek in it and the loops and the house and something older in the dirt. Return, I took the jar out. The glass had fogged in two crescents like a face seen through rain. I set it in the ring and unscrewed the lid the way Granny May taught me. A breath open, no more. The jar exhaled into the circle, a careful offering. The hollow answered with a narrowing of space as if two hands had pressed in from opposite sides. I tasted iron and peaches and chalk, the alphabet of my life these last days. The air entering me was not mine. It did not crowd, it fit. I felt lighter and more responsible in the same beat. Behind me, on the slope, a footfall arrived late to a set of 6. 7th, it did not hurry. It matched my pace from long ago. I didn't turn. This was not a thing to look at head on. It is a role that stands where it is needed and does not talk unless asked. Time, I said into the ring. How much? 1 minute already taken, the wind said. And 1 step, not yet. I thought of the culvert where the counter jumped forward without me. I thought of the seam in the house, breathing like paper and cutting the hallway a little shorter. I thought of the goat man drawing crescents around my truck and setting a gap just for me. The circle at my feet felt exactly that large, just enough for a boot. What happens when you say my whole name? I asked. Your mouth opens, the hollow said. The house grows. The ledger moves a line. I'm tired of houses growing, I said, more honest than wise. I don't have wall enough in me. You can stand still, the wind said, not unkind. But someone will step. You know that arithmetic. I thought of my father's shoulders, the set to them at the plant when he lifted without being asked, because he could not bear the sound of a younger man trying to make his back do old work. I thought of my uncle's lamp held level for mules that needed good light. I thought of my own mouth at Brown Mountain when I said yes by breathing as if I had a choice. I'll pay with quiet, I said. I won't promise with my yes. The jar fogged and cleared once like a nod. I tightened the lid a quarter turn. The circle did not like that. It pulled at my boot through the sole, polite but definite, like a dog taking your sleeve when it's time to go. At the rim, the hawk made 2 circles, then tilted and left, offended by math. The cattle shifted in a line like chess pieces getting bored. The grass leaned all one direction, though the air did not move. My watch hand staggered and held. Say it, I told the wind, because there is a point where a man wants the knife to be sharp and get on with it. The wind collected itself. It was not a gust. It was a thought. It spoke my full name the way my mother did only once. On the day she stood at the back door and called me in from the creek, because lightning had set a tree on fire and she did not want to name fear. There was no weather in it. The name stood up on 2 legs and cast a shadow so clean it made the dirt look like paper under ink. The jar's lid clicked loose in my hand, though I had not turned it. The 7th step settled behind me and took some part of the weight off my lungs without asking. In the bare ring, something darkened the soil as if the idea of rain had come through and left a line. 1 step, the hollow said gently, and for the first time since the house I believed a place could be gentle. I looked at the recorder. The counter had stalled and showed a minute I hadn't lived yet, the same minute the Clinchfield had stolen from me. The reels moved anyway. The tape will keep running, my father had said without saying it. Tell me what I carry if I step, I said. You're ending, the wind said, as if telling me where a road goes, and someone else is beginning. The jar warmed until I felt the tread of the glass under my fingertips, the tiny imperfections that make a thing handmade and therefore trustworthy. The coin at the rim did not move or shine. It was busy enough. Don't smile, a voice said from the slope close to my right ear. And I remembered how the goatman's eyes crossed me out. I kept my mouth align. I swallowed my brightness. My yes stayed where I had put it. I lifted my boot over the ring. The ground inside looked no different. That is how most doors work here. They change you, not themselves. A feather fell into the circle, brown barred with white. It did not land. It hung, spinning very slowly, as if deciding which side of this belonged to air. Hold the light, my father's voice said from the jar. From the creek. From the long hallway the house was making out of time. Just a while, I set the toe down barely. The earth under it moved up to meet me by the thickness of a breath. Behind me, the 7th step matched me exactly, a kindness and a trap. I thought of turning back. I thought of running around the rim shouting my name wrong on purpose to buy myself more seasons. I thought of paying with coins until the mountain was too full of metal to count. The wind saved me from that foolishness by doing the thing I had asked it to do. It said my whole name again, plain as a ledger, patient as an elder, and the feather stopped spinning with its shaft pointing into the middle. I did not say yes. I did not say no. I shifted my weight forward, the way a man does when he takes more of the coffin for a stretch so the others can breathe, and the bare earth inside the ring bowed like a church floor under a choir. And the recorder clicked hard, the reels pinned to red, and everything in the hollow leaned toward me as if waiting to see which room I had just agreed to build. Story 7. The family that digs sideways. The Clinch River looks gentle until you try to count it. It multiplies itself in oxbows and backwaters, doubles back under its own bridges and steals your sense of direction one bend at a time. I came to the Clinch after the hollow spoke my full name, and the house in Lost Cove began building a room out of my silence. The jar against my ribs had learned my heartbeat and chose when to fog. The coin I had left on the Sin-Eater's stone lay back in my pocket, gritty as if it had slept in coal. The ledger was moving lines without me. People in St. Charles say a company town fell into the seam in 1932 and comes up in the wrong holler at dusk. Lights where there aren't houses. Voices in a street nobody paved. A screen door slapping twice on a frame that rotted a century ago. They say if you step into that town when it stands where it shouldn't, your boots will be pointed a little sideways when you come back, and you'll find yourself walking slopes like floors. Go to the Darby Fork, said the clerk at the gas station, as if sending me to a cousin's place. Look for the dog holes. If you smell wet paper, you're near. Dog holes are small illegal entries opened under root cellars and rabbit fences. Horizontal mouths that let a man crawl into coal without announcing himself to law or prayer. I found 3 gullies on the flank of a hill where the mountain held its breath. The ground was thin with laurel, the air close and damp, and the stink of old newspapers came up from the rocks as if the hill were wrapping itself against rain. It was August, but the light felt winter short. August 15th, I said into the recorder. Clinch River country. Darby Fork. Dog holes. I said my name because these seams remember. The tape answered with a little hiss like steam leaking from a kettle too tired to whistle. He stepped out of a laurel shadow without ceremony, wearing a miner's jacket that still held its shape where a carbide lamp had once hung, but now had only the old hook, polished by thumb. He was my age, and he was also my father's age, and he was old in a way that men get old when the mountain keeps their lungs for itself. The trick of it was not a trick. Depending on how the sun hit him, the crow's feet deepened or smoothed, the hair salted or darkened, the shoulders rounded under weight or squared under pride. You're late, he said, in the voice of a shift boss who doesn't hate you and doesn't plan to love you either, depending on the shift. Which shift is this? I asked because I have learned to ask the obvious and let the mountain tell me what it thinks of me. Sideways, he said, and offered his hand. His palm was cool with damp. McKendry, my people dig lateral. Up and down was spoken for. Sideways mining was a thing in these hills even when the company built shafts and slopes with the blessing of capital and Congress. You could dig a drift out of a creek bank and take coal like a man picks berries. Careful, one eye on the thicket, one on the sky. It was thieving when the company said so and survival when your children did. You brought air, he said, as if I'd carried a loaf. He nodded toward my jacket. It'll help, but it'll ask a price. He led me to the nearest dog hole, an oval no wider than my shoulders with the laurel roots holding the dirt like netting. Lamp scabs dotted the rib where men had propped lights while tying their courage down. He bent not much and slid in, boots first. He did not look back to see if I would follow. The 7th step set down behind me in leaves and waited to see if I needed another pair of hands. Inside, the tunnel was the size of an idea you've almost worked out. The rib was close enough to touch with both palms. The roof brushed the bill of my cap. The floor was slick where slate peels soaked the same drip for decades. We belly walked for 15 feet. Then the hole widened into a drift big enough to crouch in. The dark had a body. It pressed not unkindly. You hear the canary yet? He asked. I listened. Nothing. Then a quick bright note cut and gone like a pin dropped on tile. Once, I said. Good. He seemed pleased that the mountain had deigned to warn me. He handed me something. Not a lamp, but a folded paper, soft with old handling and stiff with wet. A map, hand-drawn, showing a lacework of drifts and crosscuts under 3 hollers and a churchyard. All the lines low and deliberate, like a careful child's. In the top right corner, someone had written, in the clear script of a school notebook. Houses above not to scale. The family, he said. My family. We dig sideways. We don't sink. Sinking is asking the ground to remember you too well. Why sideways? I asked. Because graves are vertical, he said gently. We like our dead close to the table. We walked bent in a blue hour that wasn't sky. Our lamps were what they were. Headbands with folded tin cups fashioned into reflectors, the lights themselves no brighter than a lantern's memory. I could feel the jar cooling and warming against my ribs in slow tides, matching his breath when my own stumbled. The map gave up one truth after another as we moved. A line that looked like an error became a real crosscut. A scribble thickened into a room cut snug between two pillars. At a junction, where the map showed nothing but eraser smudge, the rock sighed and pulled back a hand's width, then relented, as if the decision had been made upstream and only now reached our part of the seam. You're doing that, he said, and meant my jacket. I haven't opened it, I said. You don't need to. It's listening. We passed under a root system where laurel drank from the seam. Thin white tendrils hung like winter on a string. The rock above flexed once the way a throat flexes when it swallows. Not collapse. Just a reminder that the hill wears us, not the other way around. How far? I asked. Depends on how you measure, he said. The family moved the kitchen 3 feet in 1951 and never told the preacher. The map kept the secret. The preacher felt it anyway when he prayed. He couldn't get through amen without hitting the wall. What family? Yours, he said and watched my face. And mine. We all share the seam. He stopped at a place where the rib was marked with chalk, a simple hash mark, 7 tallies crossed. He set his hand there as if greeting an elder. I set mine under his. The rock was cool and carried a vibration low as an old pump. 6 pulses, then a pause where a 7th should be. The pause hung in the palm like a question. Depending on the shift, he said again. Sometimes we borrow the 7th for weddings. He pulled the map out and breathed on it. The paper fogged and cleared. New ink glowed where there had been none. A short spur running off a crosscut, labeled in the little handwriting from my own school days. Orchard Room. Lost Cove. That's not possible, I said. Not on paper. It is if paper is how your house keeps from falling, he said. You were there. You felt it add. We turned into that newness like men stepping into a creek they've crossed 100 times and still respect. The rib tightened, then widened in apology. There was a smell I hated and loved. The cold fuzz of mouse nests, the sour of old coal, the sweetness of apples that were never here. The jar under my coat misted in 2 crescents, and for a second I saw, not with my eyes but with my hands, the narrow 5th room above the orchard in Lost Cove, the seam in the wall breathing like paper. Sideways digging saves the roof, he said, most days. We take thin cuts. We leave pillars. We pay attention. The mountain still wins. But it doesn't win all at once. The tunnel dipped. In the dip, water made a sound like talk behind a door. I thought of Coffin Creek spelling my name and decided not to say anything that could be mistaken for yes. The man, McKendry, touched the rock the way you touch a familiar animal's shoulder as you pass it in a barn. The roof lifted a hand's width. Gracious, how many of you? I asked. Enough to make a family, he said. Not enough to make a union the company couldn't break. Sideways is small work. It doesn't gather speeches. It keeps a kitchen fed. Does the ledger count small work? I said, not sure who I was asking. He studied me, a little pitying, a little proud. The ledger counts what is carried, he said. It doesn't care how pretty the burden looked on paper. We came to a section where the rib had been cribbed with old doors. Hinges still on, knobs still shining dull where hands had found them in dark. Somebody had kept a habit of laying a door down for the roof to rest on. I put my palm on one worn knob and knew without thought the rooms it had opened up there. A kitchen that always smelled like fried cornbread. A porch where a man sat and whittled away his temper. A child's room with a mason jar aquarium that never kept fish alive for long. Who taught you this? I asked, not wanting the answer and wanting it. Women, he said simply. We think we did because we crawled, but they're the ones who saw where the seams went under the stew. The family digs sideways so women can walk straight. He stopped again. The map had grown another spur, thin as a vein. It led forward, left, then up on the page, toward daylight in a place that ought to be under night. He breathed on the paper. My breath joined without permission. The line fattened. Under it, a word appeared in my father's slow, careful hand. Home. I didn't write that, I said. You will, he said. Depending on the shift, the roof creaked. Not a warning. A greeting. The canary note cut and was not replaced. The jar cooled. The seventh step entered behind me and matched my crouch so exactly I felt my own knees explain to me. We turned another corner, and the dark became a kind of light, a gray that had direction. Day was coming in sideways through broken stone, bringing with it smells that do not belong underground: hot dust, sun on a fence, river on a wind. We reached a low fall where the rib pinched down to a slit no wider than my forearm. That's the place, he said. We push through papers here. It goes to a cellar that knows your weight. How do you know it knows mine? I said, and wished I hadn't, because the mountain loves to answer foolish men. He didn't answer. He set the map down on the slate and smoothed it with his palm. The paper behaved like skin warmed by a stove. He pressed at the new spur and the paper gave. Beyond the ink line, cold air breathed once into the drift and let the smell of apples through. Cider sweet, rotted deep in the wood of a press. I knew that smell in my bones. You can take the seventh, he said, not looking at me. Or you can ask him to walk a little for you while you keep your mouth a line. Either way, the room will add. I'm tired of adding rooms, I said. That's what houses do, he said. They make space for what won't leave. I set the recorder on the slate. The reels turned in the small, honest way that reels turn when they are sure of nothing and record anyway. I touched the paper. It was soft and firm together like the inside of a cheek. I pushed where the spur ran. My finger went through. Cold bit the first knuckle. Then something warm touched back from the other side. The top of a mason jar fogged in thumbprints. I pulled and the paper flexed with me like a membrane, unwilling to tear, unwilling to let me go without a promise. Don't smile, a voice said behind my ear. And I remembered horns and a rail and my mouth learning to be a straight line. I kept it. Who are you to me? I asked McKendry. Depending on the shift, he said. I'm the man who taught your father to breathe slow when the roof groaned. Or I'm the boy you kept from panicking with a joke. Or I'm the nephew who carried the foot you were too tired to lift. Families are coal. They're old plant pressed into something that burns. Dig sideways and you'll find you're touching your own hand from another year. The paper at my finger gave a little more. The slit widened the width of my wrist. The jar under my jacket heated as if someone on the other side of the map had set a palm to its glass. The seventh step leaned into my back. Not hard, just ready. What do I owe if I go through? I asked. Time you already lost, he said, and the warmth of one breath you've been keeping aside. I don't have much of either, I said. Depending on the shift, he said. You have more than your father did. The roof flexed again, an old house settling in night. Slate ticked like cooling pans. The river's far voice came through a crack as if it had learned to crawl stone. The coin in my pocket grew cold enough to tell. The map lay under my palm, superstitious and true. Hold the light, my father's voice said from the narrow ahead. It came from the dirt and the paper and the habit of carrying too much without asking. I am, I said. And the jar fogged across my ribs and the air in the drift held still for one respectful second. Then a second voice, mine, older, came from the same narrow as if the map had two sides of my mouth pressed to it at once. And it said very quietly, don't come through. And I couldn't tell if it was a warning or a late request. I slid my arm up to the elbow into the paper and found the cool lip of a cellar shelf and the handle of a tape player that wasn't there. The walls breathed. The roof lowered a fraction and lifted again in thought. The seventh step fitted itself to my heel. I leaned forward, and the drift pinched and the map stretched, and the breath in the jar moved toward the place where the house above the orchard was busy adding. And the slate under the recorder rang once, like a spoon on a glass, and the map's new spur drew itself another inch toward me, as if a hand from the other side had decided to help, and the paper would either let me through or take the skin off my arm for asking. Story 8. The Walnut That Swallowed a Chain. The church sits quiet on a knuckle of ground above a two-lane in Greene County, Tennessee. A white box with a tin steeple and a bell. Nobody rings anymore. I came because the sexton called me after supper and said, "You're walking threads, I know. If you want to see a link go, come before the light is gone." His voice had the careful weight of someone who keeps keys and knows which doors will bite. The walnut grows by the graveyard fence, old as any story told here. It leans a little, as if listening to the names. Years ago, someone wrapped a heavy chain around its waist to keep the trunk from splitting. That's what they say. But folks also say the chain kept something in, not something out. Every Good Friday, a link disappeared into living wood. No clank, no fall, just gone, clean as if swallowed. 2 links remained last spring, the sexton said. He had expected the next to wait until next Easter. It hadn't. It twitched at Lammas and then lay quiet like a dog that knows it's watched. August 16th, I said to the tape as I took the path along the fence. Greene County Churchyard, Walnut. I said my name because even church ground counts. The reel began its steady turn. The jar under my jacket cooled, that pleasant cellar cool that feels like mercy. The coin in my pocket, which I had left on 3 stones and which had come back twice without asking, lay heavy as a promise that had learned to be doubted. I smelled walnut before I saw the chain, sharp and green, like a stain waiting to happen. Under the tree, the husks lay like yellow lanterns thrown down and stepped on. The chain circled the trunk at chest height. It had sunk so deep the bark folded over the metal like bread over raisins. 2 links showed whole, 1 half buried, 1 proud. Each was wide as my palm, hammered by a hand that had learned its craft on anchors, not fences. Don't touch, the sexton said behind me. His hands were big and clean. He wore his keys quiet. It likes to be the one who starts. What does it keep? I asked. That's the wrong question, he said. Ask what it counts. What does it count? The last thing before the next thing, he said, as if reciting scripture from an older book. He pointed with his chin toward the bell. We chained it after it rang itself one night for a boy who wasn't dead yet. The tree took the chain away from the bell and kept it. Might be that was kindness. Might be the tree was hungry. He let me film the links. In the lens, the iron looked greased with sap. Flies moved careful, like men working under a beam. Under the bark, you could feel a beat if you put your palm flat. Not a heart, exactly. A push. The push of a living thing practicing a word. Swallow. Good Friday, I said. Usually, he nodded. And it's August now, and I thought we had time. But you're a thread puller. You bring the other ends with you. I didn't answer. The jar fogged once, small, as if agreeing without pride. From the road below, a truck downshifted without horn. A familiar muscle of sound with no voice. The walnut's leaves shivered, but the air did not move. Name it? I asked him. He shrugged. Names travel in the cold, he said, borrowing a line I'd heard in a different latitude. Here, they travel in the shade. He looked past me at the chain. If you mean to stay, keep your mouth a line. The tree counts brightness the same as steps. We stood until the insects found their night pitch. The bell in the steeple wore a rope that had frayed to hair and then to a memory of rope. A swallow's nest glued into the rafters blinked 2 hungry moons. The cemetery sang with quiet names carved in unambitious stone. Simple dates, once warm people. I set the recorder on a headstone flat with the ground and wound the tape to a fresh leader. The reed of the mic took the hush and made it honest. What do you owe? The sexton asked me, not unkind. Breath. Time, I said. 1 step. Then keep them, he said. Give the tree coin. It likes heavy things that promise less than they cost. He put out his hand. I gave him the scrip. He did not look at the number. He placed it at the root flare, where the soil raised up like a collar. The coin darkened and sank a penny's width. The tree seemed to loosen, a long untying you could feel through your shoes. He took a step back then, old as the deacon who measures graves with the length of his own stride. His right foot landed. A 7th landed late behind my left. The bell rope did not move. The bell let go one tiny sound anyway. The note a spoon makes against a jar, and the jar warmed against my ribs. The link lifted a hair. Not up, forward, into bark. The wood accepted the invitation like a throat that knows a pill is coming. The sexton sucked a breath through his teeth. Not Easter, he said to the tree. Not Lent? You have no calendar. It has mine, I said before I could stop the mouth that had been opening doors all week. He caught my arm lightly with 2 fingers. Don't lend it words. A wind came up from the road with dust and the animal smell of hay. The walnut's leaves turned their pale undersides to it, then thought better and turned back. On the chain, a black hair hung caught, coarse as baling twine. I did not say the name of the thing that leaves hair like that. It doesn't belong in church talk. Beside my boot lay a crescent print impressed in dried mud. If I completed it with the one on the other side of the trunk, I'd have a circle. The gap faced the gravel path that led to the front door. Don't close it, the sexton said, as if I had moved. I hadn't. The chain groaned without sound. That's the best way I can put it. The iron's weight asked the living wood for more room. The wood made the room with something like pleasure. What does the last link do? I asked. Depends who's counting, he said. My grandmother said the last link opens a door under the church and lets the old meeting into the new one. My father said it lets the bell ring by itself and not for joy. I say if you want a number to stay last, you'd best not say it out loud. 7, I said in my head, and felt the 7th set his weight on the path dust behind me, kind and late. Around us, the graves did what they always do, offered ground the correct amount of respect, kept water moving, gave names back to the wind letter by letter. I put my palm on the trunk. The bark felt like old knuckles. Beneath it, the tree moved slow, steady, like a man pushing a heavy dresser across a floor alone not to show off, just because it must be done. The sexton went to the porch and fetched a ledger older than the church, bound in leather rubbed smooth as river stones. He opened to the page with the tree. Men had written in it with hands that worked for a living, straight letters from straight backs on Sundays, sprawled when they were tired after funerals. Beside each Good Friday, 3 generations of sextons had written, one link taken, bell stayed, wind spelled names kindly. The last entry said, Easter missed. Llamas stirred. Watch, write yours, he said. What am I writing? I asked. What you felt, he said. The ledger doesn't want poetry. It wants what a man can carry into another year. I wrote August. Last link thinking. Coin given. Jar ready. I didn't notice I'd used the word last until after the ink found its seat in the old paper. The tree noticed. The chain twitched. The bark gave a soft cracking sound and healed over the small break before my eye could finish being afraid. The jar under my jacket fogged hard. I took it out. The glass was cool, 2 crescents of cloud forming and clearing like a slow blink. I set it in the dirt at the root. The sexton watched me as if I were choosing a wife. Only a breath, he said. Don't feed the tree what you can't spare. I'm giving the ground back what I took, I said. That's a good story, he said gently. Tell it again when you're older and see if it's true. I loosened the lid a degree. The jar did not breathe. The ground did. Through the glass, soil pulled in a thread of air with the patience of a hill drinking rain. The chain moved a finger's width. The bell sounded the idea of a toll. No ring, just the memory of metal meeting air for work. Names came in the wind. Not mine, not at first. Surnames with the mountain in them, the old vowels. Men's given names spoken the way wives speak them when the preacher prays too long and dinner is burning. In that speaking, pathways laid themselves under my shoes. Between this church and the house in Lost Cove. Between the walnut and the sin-eater's stone in Widow's Hollow. Between the chain and the clinch field without its horn. They were not pictures. They were weight, choices distributed across the ground. The chain lifted. 3 bright inches of iron became bark. 1.5 remained. Stop, the sexton said. And I did. And the tree kept going anyway, slow and trustworthy as a mule. Who owes this? I asked the chain, and the chain answered by making a small bright note like a spoon on a jar. It sounded like the last sound my mother's kitchen made each night when she laid the lid on the sugar and left the window cracked to let the house breathe. Behind me, leaf litter spoke quietly, 6 light shiftings as if men had found rest for a moment and set the box down. Then a 7th, late, as if a friend had caught up. Don't smile, said a voice from the porch. I didn't look to see whose. The sexton had his eyes on the ledger as if a number might turn over by itself. I kept my mouth a line. I kept my hat off. I kept my hands where the tree could see them. It noticed that. I could tell. The last whole link brightened with sap and then dulled. It had the look of something that had belonged to a bell and now belonged to the ground's ledger. Why now? I asked, not to anyone in particular. You wrote it, the sexton said. Last, that's a word the hill saves. Say last in a place like this and you give it teeth. Can I take it back? You can write next, he said. But then you promise a thing you don't get to keep. The jar cleared and fogged again. In the glass, a shape appeared that wasn't water or air. The shadow of a circle at the roots, bare earth within. A devil's ring the size of a man's vow. I'd seen that kind of circle in Widow's Hollow where nothing grows. Here it lay under the walnut like a mouth closed with a coin on its tongue. Does it open? I asked. He looked at the ledger, then at the chain. It opens when the bell and the ground agree, he said. It opens when somebody holds a breath too long and somebody else lets one go at the right time. It opens when a link is called last by a man whose name the wind has learned to say. The wind said my given name wrong, then right, then my whole name in the flat voice of a place that has finished thinking about you, and decided to tell you what comes next. No weather in it, no kindness, just a clean line in air. The jar lid turned in my fingers without my consent. A thin thread of breath left me, out into the glass, down through the dirt. The tree took it and made it into something I could not name. A tightening, a release, the careful unlocking of a knot someone had tied in another century. The last link shifted toward the bark. The bell shook without moving. The sound went up into the steeple and did not come back down. The coin at the root slid deeper and was no longer coin, just a dark in the soil shaped like a circle of agreement. Wait, the sexton said, but he was not talking to me. He was talking to the part of the ground that keeps time for funerals. He was asking it for one more measure before the chorus. A hair, not human, stirred at the chain and caught on the bark. The goat at the switchback had been here, or something that shares his habit of listening at rails. I did not smile. I did not say yes. I did not say no. I felt my own weight shift, the way a pallbearer shifts to take more than his share. And the seventh behind me shifted with me as if we had practiced all our lives. The last link pressed into living wood. The dirt at the root ringed itself bare the width of my boot. Under the church, I heard dry boards remember a door. The air in the sanctuary turned as if 100 people had stood, hats in hand without rising at all. The ledger's page shivered in a wind that wasn't wind. Hold the light, my father said from the jar. Gentle as work, I am, I said, and the chain went quiet, and the bell prepared itself to be rung by nothing anyone in that yard could claim to see. The link moved again, slow as a mouth learning a hard word, and the ground under my foot let go just enough to feel like an invitation, and the circle at the roots drew breath, and the tape needle went to red and stayed, and I heard a knock from under the church, one polite, as if from under a river, and the last link began to slide into bark with the soft certainty of a promise becoming true, while the earth leaned toward me, as if ready to let me in. Story 9. Devil's Circle on the Pasture Rim. I went back to the rim at first light because I wanted numbers, not omens. Widow's Hollow offered both if you asked wrong. The pasture above it belonged to a woman named Ellery, who kept 2 cows and a grandson who never looked up from his phone unless the weather did something older than warnings. I asked permission the old way. Hat in hand, name said plain, purpose soft. She nodded toward the hill. Mind the rim, she said. If you must step in, don't drag your feet. Ground remembers manners. I brought things that make men feel in charge. A 100-foot tape, a bundle of survey flags, baker's twine, a pocket level, and the little plumb bob my father used to true door frames even when the house itself had learned to lean. The jar rode my ribs, cool as a cellar jug. The script coin was back in my pocket again, gritty with a taste of old nails. The ledger likes to make you repeat the lesson until you say it right. August 17th, I told the cassette, setting it on my folded coat where the grass gave way to dirt. Pasture rim above Widow's Hollow. Locals say a devil's circle grows by night. Measuring. I said my name. The reels turned. The needle sat up like a dog. The circle lay in the bowl's center. Same as before. A clean ring of bare dirt the width of a kitchen table. A color deeper than the pasture's brown. Like earth that had practiced being shadow. No weed dared it. No ant line crossed. The cattle had nibbled the grass to chessboard height down to the edge and then quit, as if their teeth had reached a law. I set flags every 2 feet along a rough radius and tied twine between them to make a crude star. The wind at the rim spelled nothing. It saved its voice. I stretched the tape from rim to ring, 10 feet 9 inches on the north arm, 10 even on the south, 10-5 on the west, 9-11 on the east, as if a hand had leaned there during the night and pressed the world thinner. I chalked the places where the twine crossed the ring so I could see if it swallowed cord without argument. People call these places devil rings, like they call every creek with a tight throat coffin. It isn't always sermon talk. Sometimes it's carpentry talk that forgot which shop it was in. Devil means don't cheat. Devil means the measure here belongs to the ground first. On my second circuit, the twine at the east mark sagged into the dirt a finger's depth and did not rise when I plucked it. It was like watching dough take on the shape of the pan. I logged it. The pencil felt heavier than it should. The jar fogged once, polite like a hand half raised in a meeting. I took my hat off because I was about to ask for something. "I came to return what I borrowed," I said. "Breath. A minute I didn't earn." My voice sounded like it does when I convince myself I know how to pay. Decent, but unconvincing. Ellery's grandson whistled for the cattle and then stopped. Mid-note, the way a radio dies when a wire lets go. From the road down the hill, a truck downshifted without horn. The sound found the bowl and folded itself inside as if tucking a child in. I put the jar in the center, lid on. It was heavier today. Not water heavy, ledger heavy. I set the pocket level on its shoulder out of habit. The bubble trembled and chose center. I sat on my heels and waited for the wind to make a decision about my name. It did not. The morning held itself flat, the kind of blank that makes people quote scripture or go home. I tried data. I set the watch by the truck clock, took it off, laid it on the ring's edge, and checked the second hand against the recorder's counter. Outside the ring, everything agreed like neighbors on weather. Inside, the second hand took to a new gait. Slow, then fast, gaining 7 minutes in a patience that felt like an apology. When I lifted the watch and stepped back, the minutes melted away in 3 long ticks. My stomach knew the trick before my mind conceded it. Equal and opposite. That is how a place pays fare when it means to keep something. I planted a flag at the north mark and leaned the plumb bob over the ring. The string swung toward the center as if the circle were a magnet for order. The point settled without touching dirt. A careful, almost kind standoff. The level on the jar crept half a bubble right and stayed as if honoring an old injury. "Do you know me?" I asked the circle, because I've learned these places like being recognized before they show their work. I was the boy who measured horn patterns until they turned into prayer. I was the son who learned to hold a breath a long way from air. The pasture said nothing. Something beneath it answered. A hum found the bowls of my ears. Too low for the tape at first. That frequency that makes churches feel haunted when it's only the furnace fan. 19 cycles if I had to guess. The old number where men see shadows where there are none and where the jar on the shelf tells you a name without speaking. Across the bowl, at the fence line, a cedar took on horns and then gave them back. Barbed wire pinged once, the note a plucked calendar. The goat man likes good boundaries. I kept my mouth align and raised a hand without teeth. The wire stilled. My hand felt seen. I took the map from the clinch drift, the sideways family's lacework of drifts. In the top corner, last night's newspaper had written itself another inch by the lamplight of my thinking. Now in daylight on grass, the paper learned a circle where the pasture should be. The ink traced it delicate, a ring that wasn't there yesterday. Labeled in the careful hand I had begun to accept as my father's when he writes inside my life, "Pasture rim, do not scale." When I breathed on the paper, the ring warmed and fattened and a faint seam appeared running down through the sketch of ground, like a buttoned placket you could open if you had the right fingers. The urge to push a thumb through was the same urge I felt at the culvert. Neither curiosity nor courage. Compulsion, the politest word for a mouth opening where a door should be. I folded the map and put it away before my hand decided who it belonged to. "Time," I said to the ring. "Take your minute back if you must. Leave me the breath. I'm not done needing it." "Return," said the hum, not in words but in a pressure that taut my ribs. It was the creek's lesson spoken by dirt. Not theft, not gift. Circulation. I set the coin at the rim where the watch had gained. It darkened and sank the depth of a promise you mean to keep even when you shouldn't have made it. That bought me a question which I used up. What happens at last? The word last went into the ground like a root searching a seam. The ring widened an inch. The flag at the north mark fell inward, gentle as a sleep. The jar in the center tipped a hair toward me and steadied itself without help, as if a hand I couldn't see minded it. Names moved in the wind, but not mine. Surnames I knew from mailbox paint. Given names spoken the way mothers stand at back doors and call them when lightning has struck a tree somewhere else in the county. I stood and faced the rim with my hat off and waited to be known. When a place remembers you, it will try to make you feel grateful for the trouble. Gratitude is a kind way to be tricked. Ellery's grandson came to the fence and watched with his phone forgotten in his palm. "My grandma says if you count it, it counts you back," he said, hushed because his body knew what his mouth didn't. "You gonna count it?" "I already did," I said. "I'll try to keep the rest to myself." He nodded in that embarrassed way the young nod when they see a stranger do a familiar work. He looked at the jar, at the flags, at the coin, at my hat in my hand, and decided to go back to chores that belonged to daylight. I envied him. The hum thickened. The recorder caught it now. A soft baritone that makes rooms shiver and people mistake their own heart for a footfall. Behind me, 6 steps crossed grass that had no reason to bend. Then a 7th landed late and kind. The air around my mouth wanted to shape yes. I kept it a line. Don't smile, the fence said, and the wire remembered horns. I held still. The goatman plucked only once more, a short note that meant count. I stepped to the edge of the ring and felt the ground ask my boot to be a certain size. Dirt gathers itself the way a palm does to receive a coin. The jar's lid twitched. I tightened it with 2 fingers and left it shut. Granny May's rule has saved me more than pride. The seam in the house in Lost Cove opened in my mind like a throat clearing. Somewhere far away, the 5th room was adding a board. Somewhere under a church, a bell was remembering its duty. Somewhere in the clinch, a map was growing a spur by the warmth of a breath I had not paid back. The pasture waited for me to choose. I took the watch and laid it on the ring again. 7 minutes grew like moss across the face and then went still. The tape counter ticked into a minute I hadn't earned. If I spent it here, would the loops forgive me? If I carried it out, would the house take another inch of hallway to balance the books? Tell me the work, I said, useless because the work had been steady all along. Hold the light. Lift where it hurts. Close your mouth until the ground tells you it has listened. The wind decided. It said my surname sober and gave me a year. It said my given name right and gave me a season. It said my whole name, bare of weather, and gave me the one thing all these places have wanted from me since I set the first tape in the old recorder. 1 step. A feather fell into the ring and hung, undecided like a needle choosing north. The twine dipped where the chalk was brightest. The coin turned not shiny but significant, the dull of a thing that has taken a side. The hum tuned itself to the number in my chest that I do not tell doctors. I lifted my boot over the ring and felt the air change temperature above dirt the way water changes temperature at a thermocline. My ankle prickled. The 7th step settled behind my right heel and steadied my vectors like a friend who knows you will be stubborn and loves you anyway. The jar rolled a finger's breadth toward the place my foot would go, as if to follow by right. I thought of my father's careful voice when he asked for the hammer I could barely lift. I thought of my uncle's carbide tapped into palm as he decided if the night needed more flame. I thought of the house seam showing the polished toe of a boot and waiting to see if I would consent to share a hallway with a man who might be me from the wrong end of the ledger. Hold the light. Came from the bowl, my father, the creek, the line through every story that makes these hills a single house. I am, I said. I put my weight forward, the ring bowed under it like a church floor under a hymn, and the flags along my chalk lines leaned toward me all at once, like a congregation standing, and the hum moved into bone, and where my soul met bare earth, the ground lowered the thickness of a breath and offered very carefully, the first of 7 steps downward. And from the fence a wire sang a single short note as if a calendar had turned its own page, and the jar lid spun a quarter turn by itself, and Ellery's grandson called my name wrong. Then right, then whole and the pasture, kind as it knew how to be, waited to see whether I would take the step that would make the house add another room in a place I had not stood yet. Story 10. The 7th pallbearer's step. There is a path behind the little clapboard church above the new river that knows how to carry what people can't. It runs from the back door, past a red oak that leans like an usher, across a patch of ground where moss grows in the shape of hands, and up to a hilltop the elders call the God's Acre. I went there because the sexton with the walnut chain told me, if you want to understand the 7th, talk to the deacon who measures graves by his own stride. He knows where the earth expects help. I parked nose out by the pump. The bell rope in the vestibule was still, but my jaw felt the faint ring from last night when the walnut swallowed the link. The jar under my jacket was cool and ready, the way a tool is ready when it loves the work. The script coin had come home to my pocket again. It gritted against my palm like old nails. The map from the sideways drifts lay folded, hiding its new ring and spur as if paper could practice modesty. August 18th, I told the tape, setting the recorder by the doorsill to catch the quiet. New River Church. Funeral path rehearsal. I said my name so the floorboards would put me in their ledger. They have one. Old Pine keeps accounts in knots. The deacon looked like every deacon blessed by heavy shoes and a kind mouth. He laid his hand on the doorframe and bowed his head a measure, not showy. "We got a box," he said. "Pine, empty today. We practice with it. You learn where the ground dips, where roots pretend to be steps." He glanced at my coat. "You brought air," he said, not asking. I nodded. He nodded back. Nothing more said about a jar in church. Behind the church, under the oak, the box sat plain on two sawbucks. Clean dovetails, rope handles. A scuff at one corner where somebody lost their patience or their grip. The deacon set his palm on it the way a man lays a hand on a child's forehead to check a fever. "We carry slow," he said. "We stop at the set-down stones. We breathe together." "6?" I asked. "6," he said. "And sometimes 7. The 7th step landed in the grass behind my right heel. Not close enough to crowd, close enough to wait. I didn't look. Looking is how you make a roll into a ghost. It is better to keep it a job for as long as you can. We took our places. The deacon counted off positions like clock: head left, head right, foot right, middle left, middle right. I stood off to the side, the way a man stands when he is at a funeral that isn't his own business. He put 2 young men at the head, 2 old ones at the feet, 1 light, 1 heavy on the middle. Then he looked at me. "You can shadow the middle left," he said. "Don't touch unless I say. Keep your mouth align. Don't show your teeth when you strain." He smiled, showing his, which made me want to do it back. I didn't. The river sang under the hill like a low choir. The air in the stairwell smelled like hymnals and cooked corn. The jar warmed, then cooled, playing careful, like a good partner in a slow dance. The deacon lifted his hand. The 6 took the box. The rope handles creaked once and learned the duty. We moved, I have carried before. Furniture. A man when a beam gave. The hard part isn't the weight. It's the math of keeping steps even when the ground wants to argue. The path behind the church has grooves cut by 100 feet under 100 griefs. Roots crown up just enough to make a man proud if he passes clean. The set-down stones are 2 flat slabs sunk level in a stretch of shade. At the first, the deacon called, "Rest," and the 6 put the box down in one sound. 6 thuds. Then the late answer of a 7th that didn't belong to any boot. The tape needle lifted and held. "Who's the 7th?" I asked, quiet. "Depends on the day," the deacon said. "Some weeks it's a neighbor you forgot to thank. Some weeks it's a debt no man can lift without help. Some weeks it's the boy you used to be catching you up. We don't name him. We just leave room." He touched the corner where the scuff was, and the box forgave the hand that had made it. We lifted again. The path narrowed. The oak reached out with a thoughtful root, where men tend to turn their ankle if they think of their sorrow instead of their step. I matched the middle left's rhythm without using my hands. My breath learned his pace and his learned mine without either of us speaking. That is the only kind of speaking the ground loves. At the second set down, the jar fogged all at once and cleared as if someone inside it had sighed. The deacon cocked his head like a bird catching a frequency. "You hear the train?" he said. I did, but not with my ears first. The muscle of a whistle under the ribs, the long, short long of a promise. No horn came down the valley. The Clinchfield can reach places it never laid track when a family is doing old work. "The rails were inside the path today, Ledger," the deacon said almost to himself. He led us on. At the third rest, the goatman's calendar plucked from the fence above the pasture rim. 1 short note. I kept my mouth align. Horns are not for church, but the mountains don't sort themselves by building material. They sort by debt. The goatman counts where he pleases. The deacon pretended not to hear. He has the gift of pretending so God won't hold it against him. We came to the kink where the path turns toward the gate. The grass here always looks pressed smooth, as if old coats were laid down for a lady. The deacon stopped and looked at me. "We got 1 more stop," he said. "The stone's up top." Then the turn. "The turn?" I asked. He looked at my mouth to see if I would let the word yes out too fast. I didn't. "The turn where we become 7, he said. "You'll hear your name from the wind with no weather in it. If you answer it wrong, we'll carry you and not the box." "I don't want that," I said, and heard my own voice behave like a fool. "Wanting," he said gently, "never changed the grade." We climbed. The God's Acre opened, fence, old stones, newer stones with names from my own mailbox memory, a patch in the corner where the ground had sunk twice in a year and then stopped, as if the earth had learned to keep its appetite in church. The deacon nodded and we did not go in. Today was for the path, not the plot. Rest, he said, and the box sat on stone with 6 sounds. Then the 7th, kind, late, the way a friend lays his hand on a shoulder and says, "Give me your end for a while." He pointed me to the ledger in the little back room. It was the twin of the one at the Walnut. Older, if anything, with pages that had learned to turn without wind when a number wanted to show itself. He opened to a page my eyes went to as if they knew the way. My surname in the column for families who had paid the 7th more than once, and beside it, in a hand I had grown up trying to imitate, my given name written small. As if not to scare me. "You can step out," the deacon said kindly, reading my face. "You can set the coin and go home. Somebody else will take it, but you'll hear your own feet follow you on the road. They'll be the right size and the wrong time. That's a misery I don't recommend." I set the coin on the shelf under the ledger. It darkened and sank enough to tell me the shelf had learned to be earth a long time ago. "Receipt acknowledged," the wood seemed to say. Sometimes wood speaks plain. "Tell me the work," I said. "Lift when you're told," he said. "Stop when you're told. Don't smile. Don't talk to the ground like it owes you. If your name comes right, don't say yes. Just breathe and step." We went back out. The 6 stood ready. The jar under my jacket warmed, then cooled, agreeing to keep air moving while my mouth did no harm. The river in the gorge below made the right sound for a day when a town ought to be quiet and a family busy. At the last set down before the turn, the wind found its voice. It said my surname sweet and plain. I felt the measure of a year sit down beside me like a tired man deciding not to leave yet. It said my given name right, with the middle letter the way my mother made it when she wanted me home before thunder. A season laid its hand on my shoulder. It said my whole name with no weather in it, and the jar lid spun a 1/4 inch and the path answered under my boots with a small lowering that meant, "Take it now or pay more later." The deacon did not look at me. He looked at the box. "Turn," he said. We lifted. The rope handles creaked like a testament sworn. 6 steps took their measure. The 7th was mine to decide. I moved in on the middle left, my shoulder under the pine, my ribs under the jar, my breath a plain tool tired of being a promise. The weight came to me like water comes to a gate when you open it. Not apologizing, not angry, just doing what water does. It was not too heavy. That is the most frightening thing I can tell you. It was exactly what I could carry. The ground approved. The box steadied. The tape needle went to red and stayed, as if shy of recording men doing their job. We turned the corner, and for one step we were not on the path. We were in the house in Lost Cove, in the 5th room that was making a 6th out of attention. A seam opened in the air as if the wall had drifted up the hill for one favor. Inside it I saw my boy's desk and the cheap cassette player with its play button pressed by nobody. On the desk a mason jar fogged on both halves like 2 rooms sharing breath. "Don't," the deacon said softly, but he meant, "Don't look too long." We gave that seam one thud of our weight, and it closed like a respectful mouth. At the gate to the God's Acre, the goatman watched from the road beyond the fence. Horns quiet, hand on wire, pupils crossed as if reading the ledger through the page. He plucked the metal once, short. The calendar moved. The turn asked for my worst habit, grinning when I shouldn't. I kept my mouth align. The weight stayed a job and did not become a ghost. At the threshold, the Clinchfield hum rose under our boots. It brought the muscle of a whistle with no horn, and the bell in the steeple decided to tremble without moving. The deacon said, "Head up," and the 6 and I lifted. On the hill, the wind tried one last trick. It spoke my name with weather in it, a storm under the vowels, to see if I would answer that wrong one by mistake. I didn't. I breathed through my nose like a man under a load. We crossed into the acre and did not go to any particular grave. This was not that day. This was the day you learned that carrying is a prayer and the amen is a set-down you earn. The deacon stopped us under no tree and nodded. "Rest," he said, the box kissed stone. 6 sounds. Then the 7th, my step late and kind, finding its spot. In the quiet after, I heard another sound that I hope you never do. It was the sound of a lid knocking from the inside. Polite, one tap. The deacon did not react. Men who have done this work a long time learn the discipline of not granting fear in office. "Who?" I asked, because sometimes you have to make your mouth ask the small question so it won't ask the great one and ruin a day. "Someone who is not yet dead," the deacon said, honest, which is the only kindness that works up here. "We rehearse. The mountain rehearses with us." I set my palm on the pine and felt the shape of a tape recorder beneath it. as if somebody had laid a machine inside to keep an account we wouldn't want to read. My father cleared his throat inside the jar. "Hold the light," he said, working voice, not pleading. "The wind said my whole name a last time, with no weather and no pity. The way ledgers speak when they know you can carry it." "I am," I said. We lifted for the walk back, lighter by exactly the weight the ground had decided to carry for us, heavier by one understanding I do not recommend, that the seventh step is not a person following you. Not always. Sometimes it is the minute you lost on the clinch field giving itself back if you'll spend it here. Sometimes it is the room the house adds while you fetch another board. Sometimes it is your own voice, older, making sure you don't grin when the goat counts. At the last bend, the river threw a little shine up the hill, and the seam in the air made a sound like paper torn neatly. The jar fogged, cleared. The bell held its breath. We set the box on the sawbucks. The deacon let his hand rest on it a time longer than custom. "You can step out now," he said, "or you can finish the turn as yours." The seventh step stood with patience enough for both choices. The map in my pocket warmed over the spur labeled home. The coin on the shelf inside found a way to become soil in a room where soil shouldn't be. The pasture rim remembered my boot. Brown Mountain leaned a lantern without a hand. The Clinchfield asked nothing, promised nothing, waited in the turn. "Tell me what happens if I finish," I said. "You build a room you won't live in," the deacon said, "and someone who loves you will sleep well in it most nights. The ledger will close a line. Another will open. That's good arithmetic for hills. And if I step out, you'll hear your own footfall behind you on roads that don't bend," he said. "You'll smile when you shouldn't. The goat will mark your place. The house will add your mouth." I took my hand off the box and put it back. The wood recognized me. That is the only word I have. It knew my weight and decided to let me be useful. "Hold the light," my father said again. "From the jar, from the board, from the day." "I am," I said, and the deacon nodded once as if to a hymn. We lifted to carry the box back inside. On the second step, the lid knocked twice. Patient as a man who has driven a long way and will not leave without his due. And the recorder by the door clicked of its own accord, and the tape needle pinned and the bell made the idea of a toll with no rope. And the seventh step, mine by decision or by default, waited to see if I would lower now into the seam that opened like a mouth at the threshold, so the church and the house and the pasture and the loops could agree on me all at once. I came to count lanterns and found the mountain counting me. Brown Mountain leaned its light to my palm. The Clinchfield took a minute I hadn't lived and offered it back only if I carried it. Coffin Creek taught me breath is work, not a gift. At the switchback, the goatman measured my brightness and warned me not to turn my mouth into a door. In Lost Cove, the house added a room whenever I spoke too much. Widow's Hollow said my full name with no weather in it and asked for one step. The Sideways family mapped a path through paper. The walnut swallowed a link. The pasture drew a ring and waited. I did what a son does in a place that keeps books by footfall. I held the light a while. I let the seventh steady me. I kept my teeth out of my smile. Where I could pay with quiet, I did. Where I could set down a coin, I left it to darken and learn the ground's language. The map keeps writing home in a hand that looks like my father's. The jar warms whenever a door thinks about becoming a mouth. The ledger moves its lines without asking, and I sign them walking. The truth is not a secret. It is a weight. The hills keep it in jars, rails, and rooms that appear when you admit you owe. I can leave. I can drive until stations change and the river forgets my name. But the tape will keep running. The house will add without me. The bell will tremble for a box not yet filled. Somewhere in the turn between away and back, a borrowed breath waits. If you hear your whole name, count to 6. Listen for the 7th. Then choose.